If you don't take care of yourself, no one else will. So make sure you prioritize yourself, do what it takes to pour into your own cup.
So this is the Educator Wellness Series. This is hopefully season 1, but it is episode 3. And our guest for January will be talking about the navigating a toxic work environment. And it is Kaylin Lamar. So she is a science teacher, a high school science teacher in Alabama. And her story is very relatable. As a mother, as a teacher, Kaylin was inspired to really do something about teacher self-care. So now she's a coach, she's an advocate, she's a teacher, just a leader in this work. And we're really excited to hear her do her thing, tell her story.
Thank you so much. I love the work that you guys are doing here. This is such a special thing. And I'm always just honored to be in a space where we're having these difficult conversations. So we're going to start off by talking about toxic positivity. Then we're going to talk about toxic innovation and toxic purposefulness. So toxic positivity, and this definition is according to Dr. Jamie Zuckerman, is the assumption either by oneself or others that despite a person's emotional pain or difficult situation, they should only have a positive mindset. And a lot of times you hear toxic positivity when you hear things like good vibes only or positive vibes here, things like that, where it's really sweeping the real problems under the rug. So when people feel uncomfortable sharing feelings other than good vibes, and they start really challenging having conversations like, hey, I know I'm still trying to stay positive, but I want this to change, or I really need this, then most organizations that are dealing, working within that type of toxic positivity start to you see where they're like trying to push those teachers out, or they're like, hey, start having problems, saying that there are certain things that they just can't do, their hands are tied. You hear all these different excuses and different ways in which, let's be real, there are teachers that get blackballed, blacklisted from different organizations as well whenever they don't subscribe to these types of notions. Then we have toxic innovation. So toxic innovation is where employees basically sacrifice that manageable workload in order to stay at the cutting edge of improvement, right? Like, this is the type of work environment where it's like we're a leading school. We're moving to we want to stay a top school. You hear things that are more geared towards being the best and the greatest instead of being in a space where the students are getting what they need. And then we have toxic purposefulness. And that is where we use these outdated things that we just don't have a reason to use it. We're just doing it to do it. It's like a values based, like, hey, we've been doing this for years. We're going to keep doing it. And if you kind of question the reason behind it, it's just like, oh, just because this is just the way we do things here. So it's really important to keep in mind that things are changing and that we cannot stay stuck in how things happened 50 years ago or 60 years ago or even 5 years ago, for that matter. Now we want to talk about teacher truths. So the truth is, teachers deal with a lot of different stressors, and I named some stressors here, but obviously this is not all of the stressors. Large class sizes, workload, paperwork, lack of support. And again, these are just some things. And the main thing about teaching is a lot of people view it as, you just get in front of the board and you stand there and you teach your content. But teaching is physically, emotionally, and mentally draining. So the school-wide impact, right? So I know on the teacher scale, these are the things that we see teachers that are emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted, like I was speaking to earlier. But also we have this low self-esteem that comes into play, low morale, where the teachers not even want to come to work. They start being absent all the time with the increased absenteeism, because it's like, wait, I'm going through all this and I'd just rather not go today. I'm just going to call in. And we already know about the teacher shortage, right? So in some instances, it's like, whatever, I don't really care. And this is where our students definitely are impacted. And that's why I do what I do, because at the core, I do want successful schools. I do want for students to feel safe, but it has to start with the teachers. If the teachers they have this list a mile long of things that they're dealing with, if everybody's coming to school emotionally exhausted, physically exhausted, dissatisfied with their job, then how in the world are these students getting what they need to get, right? So students, the impact that they have are, decrease in achievement. They're not, if they notice, hey, Miss So-and-so, she barely comes to work, she doesn't even like being here, then they don't have a reason to work hard or try to, make good grades, because nobody really cares, because mom at home or, grandma at home doesn't care either. So why should I care? So that reduced motivation that they might have had when they were younger in elementary school, when they were eager to learn and all these things. Now TikTok has their attention. Now we're battling, against YouTube and all these games and stuff like that. So they're like, man, I could be doing that instead. Why do I need to do my homework, or why do I need to worry about my grades? And then last but not least, our students definitely deal with high stress levels as well. So when the teachers are not getting what they need, then the students are not getting what they need either. And that is definitely not where we want to be. But the truth is that is definitely what's happening in these toxic work environments. So coping, because I'm all about action steps, right? Like, how do we cope with this? How do we deal with this? What can we do to make things better? Ultimately, until we do some things systemically, all of that, like we can only put Band-Aids on. And I hate to say that, because I am a teacher self-care coach, but everybody I work with, I tell them, look, I can only do so much for you. I can give you the strategies, I can give you the insight, I can help you with a self-care action plan, all those things. But ultimately, these schools, it's a lot of work to be done, right? So self-care is definitely something that I'm always talking about, and this is just a checklist that I found, but there are so many different things that you can do to prioritize yourself, and I know you guys have heard you can't pour from an empty cup and all of that, but I'm a strong believer in, if you don't take care of yourself, then no one else will. So some action steps, and this is a little wheel that I made for my clients. Before you do something, if you're working in a toxic work environment, before you do something, question your motives. Am I doing this because I want to do it? Am I doing it because it's helping me in the long run? And I know that sounds a little selfish, but a lot of times we get things added to our plates that's not even filling us in any way. We're not getting anything out of it. And so making sure that you're asking yourself why you're even doing whatever, and if it's serving you in any way. The next thing is to wait to commit. You do not have to say yes as soon as someone asks you to do something, right? You can say, hey, I'll wait, or can I get back with you about that? Feeling pressure to say yes is something that a lot of educators deal with, because we think we're going to miss the boat or miss the opportunity, or, it won't come back around and things of that nature. But just making sure that you don't have to say yes as soon as someone asks you to serve on a committee or to join, some type of organization or something. So just making sure that it's something that you feel led to do and it's aligned to you and where you are. And then last but not least, define what your priorities are. So I think that this is probably one of the most important things to do, because if you define what your priorities are, then that makes it easier to make decisions, because you're making those decisions based around what your priorities are. So don't let anything get in the way of what your top priorities are. So if you're saying, hey, my priority this year is family, like I want to spend more time with my family. So whenever someone comes around, it's like, hey, can you do this or can you do that? It's more like, hey, you know what? I can't, my child has this and I don't want to miss it. So defining your priorities and making sure that you have a very, very clear picture of what you want your life to look like, and then living the life that you want to live. If you do not prioritize yourself, your well-being, your priorities, the people in your life start to suffer, and you start to suffer. And there are things that happen physically, emotionally, mentally, that put you in a position where you are not able to show up as yourself, and you're just walking through life. So just keep in mind that self-care, although I know it's definitely something that people have turn into a whole trend, it is definitely something that is important and should never be downplayed.
Thank you so much for everything. I've got like 1,000 questions. I'm sure everyone else does as well. But Jen was, she got the first one.
Being at a district level, I'm curious in terms of what things we can implement at a site or just in general that we can encompass that might change the culture there, where it's not put on individuals, but put as opportunities for everyone to come together and have these important pieces that is so needed, but how that might look, or if there's ideas around that.
Right. So thank you so much for that question. And I'll be completely honest, when you're dealing in different scenarios, it's really personalized to where you are, right? So I would start with the people in the building. I would maybe ask some very intentional questions to get some ideas of what things they consider, self-care or mindfulness or wellness, and maybe start there. Everybody needs a little support to feel supported, and just thinking about the things that you might have needed, when you were first coming into the education space, and just reminding yourself of what that was like. So I would definitely start with asking, because a lot of times, people are open to having those conversations, and then go from there. I hope I answered your question.
Totally did. Thank you.
I think it, like a risk that we run is that, when we're thinking about it from a school building or a district-wide level, the impetus often, like, we're going to give you this opportunity to do self-care for yourself, as opposed to like, we want to create these systems so that the self-care, almost like cut it off at the source, if that makes sense. So I think Jen's question is something that we are all thinking about, and how to support teachers, which I think is a really great thing that you just touched on, Kaylin. How about we move to Maggie, who just raised her hand?
Hey, thank you, Kaylin, so much. I really appreciate everything you shared. Nick, you make an interesting point, and you said it right at the end, and also Kaylin as well, is that I think what's interesting is we need to ask the question instead of just telling and telling and telling. Take care of yourself. Take care of yourself. I honestly, this is just me. I think that is the last thing teachers want to hear. I think they want to know that they have partners with their leaders, at the school level or at the division level. So I'm wondering, like, as I think about this, because I have spent a lot of time thinking about it, is what partnerships need to be put in place to make sure that our teachers have the emotional support that they need during this really tough time. And that's just kind of where I'm at.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I do agree, the problem comes into place when someone tells you to take care of yourself, and then they turn around and email you at 6:30 at night. Right. So it's nothing wrong with saying it, but the actions have got to align. And that's where I think some of the things that are missing, if we're going to have mindful Mondays with the students or things like that, why can't we have mindful Mondays for the teachers too? A lot of these things are in your building. They probably they're already happening, but we're just looking at them through a different lens. We're thinking about it. The things that work for your students, they'll probably work for your teachers as well. Asking them those hard questions, like you just said, I love that question. How can we work together? How can I support you? But not just asking, having the action steps behind it. And I think that that's where a lot of the miscommunication comes, because we do these surveys, we fill them out, but then nothing happens. We have these conversations. It could be leaders in the room, but then after the conversation, there's no follow through. And it's like, it has to be a part of your culture. It has to be ingrained. It has to be something you work towards, not just once a month when you have the potluck, not just every other, Friday when you have jeans day, but literally it has to be an everyday priority for the entire building, making sure that, if we're working in these work hours, we're going to maximize our work hours. And after that, you're not hearing from me. After that, I'm not going to ask you to do X, Y, and Z or add this to your plate, because I already know that this is something that is, outside of your boundaries, and honoring those boundaries that people set and things of that nature.
The thing that I really loved about your answer, Kaylin, is the idea of like that lens. So it's like, how can we, whether it be, I don't know if it's like leadership training or what is it that we just get them so when they're making decisions, that's the lens that they're thinking through, where it's not just the bottom line, it's not just the test scores, but it's also the wellness of the people, right? It doesn't have to be the only thing, but it's got to be maybe a contributing factor. And I think one way that we can do that, Maggie, that pops into my mind is a quote that I know one of my colleagues, I think, took from someone, which is like, nothing for us without us, right? Like if you're going to do a decision that's going to impact me and my life in the classroom, make sure that I am there for the decision, whether it be like a representative or someone like that to give you the teacher perspective before making a huge decision. Kaylin, I had a few questions for you, just one, and then I'll let other people have the airtime as well. But how do we balance teachers who have different opinions of what toxic is? And I think sometimes there's like friction there that ultimately leads to this kind of resentment between teachers. Do you ever find that in your experience? And how do you think that we should navigate that of like what toxic positivity actually is?
That's such a great question. I do think that, and then we're social media culture, people kind of take things and run with it, right? Because I hear the word toxic. My kids say toxic. That's toxic. You're so toxic, and things of that nature, but they're not necessarily using it in the right context. So I mean, honestly, when you're dealing with things like this, it is kind of open to interpretation in some instances, because what I deem acceptable or okay, the next person might not, right? Like the next person has kind of normalized the thought of working outside of school hours, but me, I'm like, no, that's a boundary for me. So if someone continues to ask me to do things outside of work hours, for me, that might be considered toxic. But again, for the next person, they're like, this is a part of the job. So I almost think that it's kind of like a mindset, and I hate to say meeting someone in the middle, but it has to be some type of middle ground where, this is how we're going to run this school, or these are the things that are like acceptable versus not acceptable.
And I think that's why it's probably good that there's a balance, right? Like this, even the things that are on this slide, like these are things that like a teacher can do themselves to navigate the toxic environment for themselves. Right. So that's like one side of it. But then the other side of it is what I think it was a Jen, I think, to start us off, was Jen and maybe Maggie, but like talking about what can we do to then support them. Right. I think both of those things are obviously needed. Right. And I think that's kind of where that friction can kind of be mitigated, is when you're thinking about it for yourself. My follow-up question is, obviously you were referring to it in terms of teachers, but you were also referencing yourself as like a Black educator, and you having I think Krista in the chat had said, like, constantly having to feel like you have to prove yourself. And there's like these other extra things that you're dealing with that honestly, like, I wouldn't obviously like experience. How can we support people without them having to ask us for help?
Just do it.
Yeah.
I mean, be kind, do something that's going to uplift someone, give them a nice, a nice email, shout them out. I mean, it doesn't have to cost a bunch of money. I just feel like just taking the opportunity to just be kind of have those authentic moments where, I mean, if the conversation happened, it happens, but you don't put it on the other person to, have this exhausting, draining conversation about why they feel this way, right? Like, because as a Black educator, with social justice and all the things that have happened in the world in the last few years, there's a lot of things that it taxes us. It adds stress. It adds so many different layers to where we are. But again, we don't necessarily want to talk about that all the time, right? So just saying, hey, I hear you, I see you, like, here, I mean, I'm thinking about you, things of that nature. It doesn't have to be a whole production, right? Just being genuine, authentic, and showing up for someone just by actions. Because I know we say it all the time, but actions do speak louder than words. So support. Like, if I'm advocating for something, hey, have my back. Say something, don't say I was with you in the meeting, you did good. No, say it out loud in the meeting. Don't wait.
Kaylin, as our guest of honor, you can have the last word. What's your last piece of wisdom for everybody, and we'll say goodbye.
I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier. If you don't take care of yourself, no one else will. So make sure you prioritize yourself, do what it takes to pour into your own cup.